And I have my countdown timer going, of course, which is PowerShell driven. Okay, so let's give you my developer credentials so you know I'm okay to speak here. I'm a bit more than just a scripter, despite what Pat said. Writing my first code in 1980 on a Commodore PET that my late COBOL programming father used to bring back from his office. I've been in this Citrix EUC space since 1995, although before that I was a Unix developer, C and C++. Invented that application manager thing, which is now called application control. So again, that was written in C++. My day job these days, mostly a sort of developer come consultant. That might be scripting, it might be C#, it might be C++, it might be C. As you'll see on my list of dislikes, it's definitely not Visual Basic. And there's a lot of scripts on GitHub. I'll make these slides available afterwards because there's a lot of links in here as well. So some useful troubleshooting scripts. The script that I'm using for the demos shortly isn't on there yet, but I'll make sure it is up there with some notes later. So it's kind of all self-contained. So anyway, enough about me. So why use the, well, I say the Common Connection Manager SDK. We'll just call it the Connection Manager SDK. What does it actually do? Well, what it gives you is the ability on a Windows client, so just Windows only, to be able to get information about your sessions. So effectively what, something like Connection Manager will give you, the Citrix tool, but in a lot more detail. So if we went to, let's have a look, for instance, this is the advantage of doing it through this platform. If my laptop actually responds, is that I can switch between demo and slides absolutely seamlessly. So good old Connection Center. You'll see at the moment, I've got one connection and I can get some properties of it. And as we'll see, I can get all these properties programmatically as well. So I don't need to try and screen scrape or anything ugly like that. So we'll come back to that later on, including getting things like credentials. So for instance, my laptop, I'm actually not logged on to a domain, so it's a local user, but my Citrix connections into my lab are actually domain users, so I can actually find out what I'm connected as at the far end as well. So I've got a lot more granular than just sort of access to the processes. It's not just about getting data, but I can also control the sessions as well. And where I've used the Connection Manager SDK previously has been where I've actually wanted to do my own automation. So there's plenty of automation tools out there for simulation of users, testing loads, testing fixes, etc., from the likes of Login VSI, Automi, and so on. But those tend to be an investment, should we say? So it's quite often what I want to do is just knock something together quickly to log on some sessions, do some stuff in the session, and then log off. So the Connection Manager SDK is a very good way of being able to control that. So I can do things such as disconnect a specific session or log off a session, rather than just having to kill WFICA 32 processes because you're not quite sure whether the server will see that as a disconnect or whether it will automatically log the user off. So we're much more in control. And one of the key things, which I'll sort of show you how to set up, not necessarily give you use cases for, but I'm sure you can imagine these, is the events side of it. So, again, rather than having to poll, you can set event handlers, slightly different from the other event handlers you might have used across, certainly PowerShell if you use it. I was going to do this demo in C++, because that's kind of like, if you like, the most sort of native to the SDK, given that it's effectively a DLL that you have to load. But I then actually found a Citrix sample PowerShell wrapper for it. So I thought, me being a PowerShell person, I would use that. And in some ways, it's easier to demo that way and let some of you get started. But the code can be used through C++ as well, and whatever you can do in PowerShell, you can do in C# as well. In fact, you'll see we'll actually be loading a C# file rather than having to add type or something like that you might do in PowerShell when you're doing platform invoke things. So we can register and get these events. Obviously, they're inherently asynchronous. So we don't have to sit there polling going, has there been a log on? Has there been a log on? We can get our callbacks once we've registered them. This is where I learned some stuff about delegate functions in .NET today. So that we can then take actions when various events, and we'll see the sorts of events that we can register for shortly when I get more into sort of showing the code and the demos. So those are the sorts of use cases, and sort of in terms of automation and testing. But also, if you want to more tightly integrate other desktop tools, security tools, etc., so you can say, okay, well, when I log on to a Citrix session, I'm going to do this and this at the client end, for instance. So you're not looking at automation at all. So what you really get is just visibility into what's happening in the Citrix client, the workspace app, or formerly known as receiver, or program neighborhood agent, which I saw the icon for yesterday when I was logging on, which was quite nice. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we don't have an SDK to install per se, because as long as we've installed the workspace app, then we get those two DLLs. So if we go to the program files, which I meant to have open, I do apologise, but live demos, you can't beat it. What could possibly go wrong? So if we go to the Citrix receiver folder, I've done a per machine install, because it will actually install into the user profile as well by default. So we've got it in program files x86 because it's still 32-bit. Hint, hint, Citrix. So here we can see, well, in fact, we've got 4 DLLs, CCM proxy and proxy 64. You can probably guess the difference between them. I think it's 64, actually, if you do the math. Or maths. Sorry, no, I'm presenting the state. Sorry, it's definitely math. So what we'll do, and you'll see in the code, because I'm using 64-bit PowerShell instance, I'm actually using PowerShell 7, which I don't do very often because most of my customers don't have it. Because that's 64-bit, I'm actually using the 64-bit DLLs, even though the process that's running, my Citrix connections, which we've seen one already via Connection Center, are 32-bit. So it doesn't. You're not using the bitness to match the client, you're using the bitness to match the development environment you're in. So probably 64-bit. So if we're doing it in C or C++, then we use good old load library to get that library. Where's it from? There's a couple of registry values you can find to see where it's installed, because it's not always installed in the default program file Citrix ICA client. It might be per user installing the profile. Those are frowned upon, but sometimes the client install takes on its own advice to install in there. Like I say, there isn't an SDK to download as such, so you don't have libs or anything like that. So you can only use it by loading a library, getting the function addresses for the various entry points, and then dereferencing those, because you get good old function pointers, which is effectively what we're doing as well with the C# wrapper that Citrix have provided. So if I bring across that GitHub page that I had open earlier and ready for the demonstration, there we go, find the right one. We'll see there's actually some good samples. So if we go to the top level here, so GitHub, Citrix. Again, there are links to this in my slide deck. There's only a few slides, but they're mainly sort of reminders for what I should waffle on about, and references for you afterwards. So you can see in here there is actually the PowerShell module, and as I mentioned before, a C# script would actually, the module will load. So the module itself is really just a wrapper and some convenience functions for that C#. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail when we get into demos of proper stuff later. I'm not just going to be showing static pages. Don't panic, folks. Okay. So how do we call it all? Let's actually bring some PowerShell across. I was going to invoke this PowerShell window from scratch, but then we needed to size the font, so hopefully people can see that. So just to prove that I am using PowerShell 7, notice we're using tab complete. Then, there we go. Not sure if it's the latest and greatest, but it's fairly recent. So that's PowerShell 7. Do I have to use PowerShell 7 for this? No, I don't. I have actually tested all the code I've done in PowerShell 5.1. There was some slight uncertainty when I started using delegates, but I can confirm this code works in 5.1. I just thought I'd use 7 because I don't get to use it much in my day job, unfortunately. Okay, so I've got some demo code again. I'll make this available. Again, I'm not really expecting you to read it as such at the moment, but it's just I'm going to actually dot source some of this in. So dot sourcing in PowerShell means bring it into the current session. So really, I just need this class because I need these methods for the events that I'm going to be doing later. So but I'll just keep the screen fairly clear so that we don't have any sort of contradictory information. So as per my lines for my demo, first thing I'm going to do is to actually dot source this script, although I'll just show you some PowerShell features. So I'm going to do a Control-R to actually search through my history, and I've tagged everything with a dot source, not a door source. So you can see there, that's actually not the one I want, that's the one I want next. It doesn't really matter the order I load them in, but okay, so that's going through my persistent history because I've used this before. And persistent history is great because it's going to be there even when I reboot my laptop because it's in my local profile, so it's persistent. So that's dot source. That what does that mean? Well, it just means that class guy is it's supposed to be guy's class. I seem to have slipped an I in there accidentally. Yeah, of course you have guy. So we've dot sourced that. Now we need to load the module. So I've previously copied the this that I downloaded from GitHub, where we've just seen the web page. So we import the name. I've put some comments in here to help as well. So that's in my PS module path, which is oh my god, what's that? Okay, let's split that on a semicolon. So I've actually copied it into that first one. So that's there. So if I do a import module with alias IPMO. Don't use aliases in script because it makes them much harder to understand for mere mortals, even for me. I am mortal, believe it or not. So IPMO is the alias, like in the same way that LS is an alias and DIR is an alias for get child item. That will fail with a rather unhelpful, unable to, well, I did mention the C# file, but that's because I've had problems with this. What I actually need to do is to CD or to the folder where that C# file is. You can see that. Why did I type LS instead of CS? Oh! So now I can do the import module again. I won't bother searching because I know it's only a couple of commands up. And now we've hopefully, loaded a module. Doesn't give us any error. So are we good to go? Well, we'll find out, won't we? So we'll do this CCM. We'll call this initialize. This is what you've got to use before you start using any other of the CCM calls in DLL, is the CCM initialize, just to set everything up. So we'll do that. Again, I'll just search through my history rather than copying and pasting. So there we go. $CCM equals CCM initialize, so I can actually get a variable. It tells me it's been initialized already. I'm not quite sure why, but it works. We can interrogate the contents of that variable. It tells us various bits of information, and we can also see what methods we've got. So I could pipe it through get dash method, members even. Or GM, which is the alias for that. So that shows us what it can do with it. CCM shows, that just shows us here the properties. This shows us not only the properties, the names of them, but also the methods that are available, so the functions I can call on them. So you can see we've got quite a few, some to do with enumerating various things you'd probably expect. Show me the sessions, show me the applications, getting various bits of information, and then we can see there are some events. Again, those of you used to sort of .NET classes, you'll notice there aren't actually any event member types in here. So normally you might see an event member type. So I've been using some of those for some of the event log .NET classes recently to tail, as in live display event logs, but where you can just use the generic generic waiting functions to register interest and wait on those events. But we can't do that here. But there is another way of doing it, so we don't have to do that horrible polling stuff. So those are all our various members. Another way we can see that is with our variable, do a dot, and then this seems to be that something people learn every time I do a session is control space. So what that does is show all of the available methods and members, like we just saw by piping through get-method. But if we notice, so let's say we're going to go and enumerate sessions. Notice at the bottom in blue, it actually shows us the parameters and types of those parameters. So it's taking a reference to an array of sessions. Don't worry too much about the types because we can simplify that. And if there were overloads, then it would show all the various overloaded parameters as well. So that's rather useful for those sorts of things. So let's actually have a look at our sessions again. Like I said before, that's very much like Connection Center. So let's actually bring Connection Center up and have a look at the properties. And we'll leave that up whilst we then enumerate sessions. So it's left that up because I hit escape. Now, another thing I tend to do in PowerShell is I'm going to come back to that, but rather than retype it, I'm just going to comment it out so I can come back to it. So I need to define an array of sessions. And again, already done that. Oops. I'll Control S to search the other way. So there I've set my sessions up as an empty array. So at the moment I have no sessions because I have to pass that as this reference parameter, as we saw. So let's go back here and we'll just give it a ref $sessions, getting tab completing because I'm not very good at typing, as you've seen several times already. And that comes back because that's actually returned the status 0 being the slightly illogical status, which is good status, error_success. If you've come across that in Windows, because APIs are split into two, those that return error success or anything greater than 0 is an error, but also another type which return a Boolean where 0 is false, meaning failure. But you just love the consistency or lack of it. So, $sessions, what have we got? Have we got anything in it? Well, yeah, we've got one whole session, which is kind of what we're expecting looking at Workspace Connection Center. So let's have a look, see what we've got. Got some fields in here, it's slightly bigger, massive font size I'm using, so we can see a session ID. It's negative, but that doesn't matter. Various names, so we can see, this is, again, you can correlate this information between the Connection Center, so you see we can get in that pretty much. Bear in mind that these figures are changing in Connection Center, whereas these are static when they're called, but we can see they're very similar. We can see I'm logged in as the good old user Billy Bob through the domain guileach.local. I'm not locally here. I'm not Guileach. I am Guileach, actually. Yeah, I am. I demand that I am. So I'm a completely different person, but this is what I was saying about getting the information out of the session, so I can see who I've actually logged on as in that session. So useful information. Now, if we go and make another session, what I'm going to do now is to set up the event handlers. Now, this is the bit where I have fun because I hadn't used delegates in .NET. Well, I tried to use them in PowerShell before, anyway, which was a little bit involved, but fortunately, I found some code. Again, there's a reference to it in the deck. So for the sake of argument, let's just put that in. Because I'm using Windows Terminal, I don't even have to right-click and select paste. I can just right-click. Which takes a little bit of getting used to, but it does then save you time. So I've .source that, which has this get delegate function in. So I'm creating my own delegates based on these static methods, which are these methods up here. So at the moment, these are just placeholders for your event notifiers. Yeah. So again, although the Citrix module uses a lot of that write hosting, equivalent console.writeline, so it gets a bit noisy. I've actually tidied that up for the C#. I downloaded so that we're not getting a lot of notifications in here. But what I am going to do is to set on verbose here. There we go. Obviously, because I'm not running a script where I'd call it with mine as verbose. So I will take that block to set up the effectively the delegates or function pointers, if you're as old as I am with C. The feature of Terminal, if you're going to post multiple lines, it'll warn you, how often have you pasted the whole of a text file accidentally? Well, this is designed to help you stop that. There we go. It's done all that. So don't worry about the formatting. Some verbose stuff on there as well. So let's just clear the screen to make it a bit tidier. In fact, let's make the path a bit simpler as well. Now I've loaded the C#, I don't need to be in there, and we'll set up the event subscribers. So we'll start to see some events. I want to get that in place. And now we start a new connection. We start to see those events coming in because I've set the verbose mode, so I can do a write verbose. So C# equivalents are available. So no errors from calling those functions within the PowerShell module. So those are all set up now. So let me start a new connection. So let's bring my browser over. Tutor inactivity, story of my life. Log on as Billy Bob, who we saw was already logged on. Go to the apps. We've already got a desktop launched, if you remember. Oh, yeah, you don't believe me that I've got a desktop launched. Sorry, of course, I didn't remember. I need to show you there's nothing up in my sleeves. Here is my published desktop. That's the one that Connection Center is telling you about, the XA PVS Server 2019. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Let me just turn that back to a window. Get a drink from my Citrix Bluetooth water bottle. Who knew you needed a Bluetooth water bottle? Oh, I've lived without a Bluetooth water bottle in my life all these 50-something years. I just do not know. Okay, so let's go back to Storefront. Go to the apps. Launch one of my favourite apps, the one I use most often, Notepad. I've not set up auto launch because it's easier when I'm debugging things. So we'll start that connection. I see some more information because that'll be even more exciting. Makes the connection, and let's go and find our window. Let's make that a bit wider because it's wrapping in a non-musical sense. Let's go and find the connection screen again. Or not, as the case may be. There we go. So that's now my published Notepad. But what we can see in the background here is I have had a number of events come in. I don't really want to go into detail given that I don't have a huge amount of time. But these correlate to the, in fact, we move that down a little bit. The event handlers that I set up via the methods in that CCM object that I could set up. So we can see here, for instance, we pass through various session IDs. So you can see I've got two quite distinct session IDs here, a negative one and a positive one. What are these event IDs? Well, they're all defined within that module, so you can go and have a look and find what they are. If I'd had more time, I've written a lookup hash table to convert them to human readable text, because I know you humans like readable text, whereas I just read noughts and ones. And we can see the context of these. So you can see there are subtly different, are there subtly different ones? Yeah, I've got at least two different event handlers here. So we've got the sessional connection event notification. Why is it sessional connection? Because I was lazy, and rather than having two different event handlers, I used the same event handler because I passed through a context, which happens to be an enumeration, because when you set up the event handlers, you give it effectively the delegate, so the pointer to the function that you want it to call when the event happens, and then you give it what actually is an int pointer, but effectively a number, which is the context. So I give each one a different context, because what I'm doing is converting each of these into its numeric equivalent, and I just decided to start at 42 because it's my favourite number. So what we do here is we're effectively converting that from its enumeration text to an integer, which is then converted to an int pointer. Oh, I do like talking to developers. It's so much easier than having to talk really slowly to non-technical folk. Have we finished with that screen? Yeah, we have for now. So those are calling the various callbacks. And if we run the session query again, having just lost the PowerShell window that I was using. Okay, so let me just move that back up and clear these events. Again, they're coming out asynchronously at the moment because I've just got that verbose write verbose, which is the preferred way to do things in PowerShell rather than console write line or write host. I'm not talking to the Citrix side. So let's clear the screen. So let's go back to our sessions again, somewhere up here. I'll use the search. So I can call the sessions again, but what I'm actually going to do first, because if you remember, I used sessions before, and because it's the same PowerShell process, that's still there. So what I'm going to do to make sure that that's clear is to actually call it clear, so that there are no sessions, still an array. Clear? What? Dare you not clear? Yeah, don't say no to me. Right, so let's enumerate the sessions again. So we've still got our CCM object, which we created at the start via that CCM initialize. We now pass across the reference to the sessions array that I've cleared, just in case, if this failed and returned non-zero and I didn't bother checking the error status, it might still show me the old sessions. So I always want to make sure I've got the latest sessions. So let's see how many we've got now. We've got 2 now. If you remember before, we had 1. Because if we bring back good old connection center, whose process is concentra.exe. So I always used to think was concentrator.exe, but it's not. It's connection center. You can see now we've got the published desktop we had before, but now I've got a published app running off that particular server. So what I'm going to show is how we can get that equivalent information through here. So what we'll do is we'll just output sessions to the console. As we can see, there's one with the session ID. That's the positive one. If you remember, I said it was a negative one. So that's the new Notepad file Citrix Workspace app title. And here's the published desktop we saw before. But again, we can be a bit more selective with what we show in terms of the fields and format it nicely with FT, alias and format table. Or, of course, we can use one of my favourite PowerShell commandlets, which is also available now in PowerShell 7, which is out grid view. But if we do that slightly better and we just select everything, which is a better way I find to visualize all the fields, simply because what we can do is, eventually just have to come up somewhere, then filter and sort and do all those sorts of things that we might want to do with the data afterwards. For some reason, I don't know why that took so long, but it did. So here we can see all that information presented in a slightly easy form, and we can filter these fields. So there's a lot of fields. Remember, this is client side, so there's unlikely to be a lot of sessions, because you might have a couple of published apps open, maybe a published desktop, or maybe a load of published apps. Either way, you can filter in here through a grid view if you want. You can sort and so on. And little known feature of grid views, even if you don't use the pass-through, is you can use Control-C. So you can't right-click, but if I've now pressed Control-C, you have to take my word on that. When I close it, if I go back to my PowerShell or Windows terminal, just clear it, the hash so nothing gets interpreted, Control-V, you can see that line's content is now actually being pasted into here. So that's quite useful, but I will actually be using that session later. So let's just go back to the slides, because that reminds me what I need to talk about with my remaining 14 minutes. So we've talked about what I've talked about, and you've witnessed CCM initialize work with a Z, obviously, because this is America. We can in fact, and notice that, and we'll do the enumerate applications, because what I want you to see is that it's the applications that are running on the client. We're not enumerating the applications that are available on Storefront. That's not what this SDK can do. It can't even launch or authenticate with Storefront. But the best it can do is launch an ICA file. which is okay if that ICA file has static content and passwords rather than tickets and so on, but it's a little bit limiting. So let's actually go and look at applications. So I need an applications array. There's one I created earlier. I'm now going to enumerate apps. So again, what I'll do now is assign the result. So the result is actually 0 or for success and non-zero for failure. So has that worked? 0, yeah, that's worked. $applications was an empty array. I've got 1, not 2, but 1. Why? Well, yeah, because one's a published app, published desktop. Only one of my 2 connections is a published app. And then we can go and have a look at the properties of that. Yeah, and notice that session ID there corresponds to that one there. And we can see that is the the name of the window, Untitled Notepad, and with the / remote, as those of you familiar with the Citrix published apps will see, and some data about the icon. So if we enumerate so that's enumerating the applications. So it's not showing me all those that are available in Storefront, wherever that window disappeared to. It's showing multiple monitors. Too many windows for an old man like me to keep track of. So you see, we did actually have more published apps than that. So that but because I haven't launched any of these 3, then they're not shown on the client side because I'm only enumerates not what's available, but what's actually running. Okay. So if you don't have any connection at all to any published resources, you can still run CCM initialize, but enumeration of applications and sessions will return 0 elements. Sorry, time some Bluetooth water again. It's very dry and hot here in the UK. We're not used to it. So we've got the enumerate applications. Again, in the slide deck, these are just links through to the Citrix documentation for these, although, as you'll see on the slide about shortfalls, that the documentation isn't that great. The best documentation is actually that C# file as part of the GitHub download for the CCM. So we can enumerate applications, we can enumerate sessions, and then we can do some session control. So let's show that working. Let's bring that over here. So that's just a little bit smaller. So I'm going to disconnect the published desktop, for instance. In fact, no, I'll log off the published desktop and I'll disconnect the published app because that'll be really exciting, won't it? So let's bring that up so you can actually see that disappear in real time. And follow sessions. Which one is it? It's the second one. So the first one is the notepad. The second one is this one. So what we'll do is, hopefully, so I've got a log off session, but rather than using numbers, I'll just use $session sessions 1 dot session ID. Again, tab completing. And what we'll see, hopefully, on the left-hand side, if it goes to plan. Hey! There we go. Oh, didn't even get it in time, yeah? So that was the blue screen with the log off. Notice we've got 2 event notifications down here as well. So again, remember that was the session ID, which I passed using the property, and there it is in the callback. Yeah, so I could do things within the callback. If I say, oh, this session is disconnected, let me do something. Perhaps it was a key published app for the user that you always want to keep alive. So you might have some logic that says, oh, let's launch this again, or notify somebody, or pops something up saying, you've quit that, please go back to Storefront and launch it again. So it's not just about automation of testing of things, but that's I keep coming back to that because that's where I used it before, albeit about 7 years ago. But notice it still works. I mean, in my lab, this is all 2106, the latest current branch. So it still works with the latest and greatest. And we'll do a disconnect. So again, let me find that published notepad. So there's my published notepad. And we'll do a disconnect this time. So let's clear the screen again, because these asynchronous notifications little bit in the way, but not as bad as when it was right host, believe you me. So what I'm going to do now is talk and think at the same time. It's always challenging for me. So I'll disconnect. So again, because I've used that before, I can just do a Control-R and search for it. And I remember this time I did say it was the first session, so session 0, because of course indexes start at 0. Well, decent programming languages anyway. So I'm going to disconnect that session. So if you keep your eye on the notepad over there, that should disconnect. Yeah, there we go. So we've got much better control rather than just killing off WFICA32 processes, which are behind those. I'm actually deciding, am I going to log it off? Am I going to disconnect it? And I've also got the ability to actually log off all sessions or disconnect all sessions just with a single call as well, if I want. If you want to get a bit more info about the session, we've got get session info. Again, we can do that pretty quickly. Let's search for V2. So I'm going to create a new object because it's a reference parameter. So what I can now do, well, again, we'll do the CCM dot and then control space and get session info V2. So I'll go down to there. Notice I'm just using cursor keys, so I don't need to tab through a whole load like I would if I was just using tab completion. So we can see it takes a session ID and a reference to one of these sessions. And guess what? I haven't got any sessions at the moment, have I? Because I've just showed you how to disconnect them. Well, fortunately, it hasn't logged me out yet. So let's just reconnect to Notepad because that'll be quicker, given I've only got 6 minutes and 52 left, according to my timer. Refresh that, launch Notepad. Up it. No, you've not lost audio. I just actually was quiet for a few moments. I know it's something uncanny for me, but you've just proven I can do it. Let's get storefronts out of the way. Storefront out of the way, please. Thank you. Again, some asynchronous events coming in. Of course, it messes up my command line a little bit. So let's get rid of all that. Let's bring the... So there's my published notepad again. That's just a local notepad guy. Oh, I can show you how to break out a notepad, but this isn't a hacking session. So what we'll do then is we'll look at sessions. So let's enumerate sessions again. So $sessions. Let's empty the array just in case. I like to be thorough. Belt and braces. And let's enumerate sessions again. Sessions, just check we've got that one and just this one because I logged off the published desktop. There we go, with the session ID of that. Well, if you can remember that, great, but I won't. So let's get the session info. Session attributes. I think I found a bug in the module, so I'm not going to demonstrate that today. So there is previous call that I've used, but again, I'll just use $sessions. Spelled the correct way. I'll tab complete, like I keep saying to, so that I don't get it wrong, because there's obviously a fault with this keyboard, not with me. Session ID, again, return 0, so that's okay. And if we look at session info V2, because it's a V2, if you've ever used Windows or Microsoft APIs, they tend to be the equivalent of the EX variety of calls, where it gives you a little bit more information. So again, this is giving some of the information that we'll see, or most of the information that you actually see in Connection Center, plus a few extra bits about certificates and so on. So that gives us the session information, so we can get that as well if we need it for anything in particular. Again, it's all objects, of course, so we can use them in C# or C++ very easily. Run them to parse text, which is always a pain, even if you do like regular expressions. And we got the event, which I've kind of already shown you that we've got. More sort of a case of just a teaser so that you can write your own handlers. What are you going to do when this particular event fires? There's a rich set of them, as you can see from the verbose outputs in that PowerShell window. We don't do any of that horrible polling. Polling, as you know, of course, is the devil's work. a few limitations. Well, I think I said this already. It can't launch sessions unless you've actually got an ICA file. And if you've got an ICA file, it was using an association anyway, so you could just use shell execute to launch it. It is Windows only, and the documentation does leave a little bit to be desired. But what I'll be doing is feeding back on the various bits, hopefully to get those improved, because the docs team is pretty responsive usually to things I feed back. And that's about it, really. So, as I say, I'll make the slides available, some links there, and there are also links within the slide deck itself, which I'll PDF and put out. So I think a video and recording will be available via Citrix as well for this. And that last link is the get delegate function I use to convert my PowerShell static class member function. So that means PowerShell 5, but Windows PowerShell. To be able to convert those to delegates so I can use them as callbacks for my notifications. And with that, I'm done. So go forth and develop. Or maybe fifth.